Good morning, St. John's. This past Sunday, I focused my sermon on the gospel where Jesus offered this amazing paradigm shift. He says the Sabbath was made for humans and not humans for the Sabbath, and we talked about that. But there was this other reading in 2 Corinthians where Paul also offers an amazing paradigm shift. And it was one that I didn't talk about then, but I'm just going to talk about here briefly in this video today. The background is super important. So Paul had established this church in Corinth, and at some point along the way, after establishing it and then traveling on, these other preachers came. Now, these were much more flashy than Paul, much more eloquent. They were wealthier than he was, put together. Paul, we know, was oftentimes homeless, bouncing from one home to another, just as he was preaching the gospel, relying on people's hospitality. So these other flashy preachers at some point were saying, look, do you want to hear the message of the gospel from us, people who have it put together, or do you want to hear from this guy? Look at this guy. And so here is Paul now in many ways having to defend himself. Does he have the credentials, as the church was saying to him, like, do you have the credentials? These people have the credentials. It looks like, obviously, from externally looking at them, to preach. What are your credentials? So Paul writes this letter, and in some ways you kind of get this sense that he's frustrated. He's like, what are you talking about? You guys are my credentials. I established this church. The fact that you're thriving as a community in faith is because of the fact that I brought this message to you. You're the fruit of my message. But then there's this other part, and we see this theme throughout 2 Corinthians, where Paul basically admits, like, I'm not the most impressive person. Like, he doesn't try to prove that he is. He says, me and my companions, we came not to promote ourselves. We came to promote one person, and that's Jesus. That's it. And so he says, we have this amazing treasure, the knowledge of Jesus Christ. We have it in jars of clay. So he describes himself as a jar of clay, as opposed to, you keep a treasure in that time in jars that were made of something much more permanent, like bronze. But he's like, we have this treasure, the treasure of the knowledge of Jesus Christ, in jars of clay, so that it's super clear that the power that we are bringing is not coming from us. It's not coming from me. It is all Jesus. And we see this theme where Paul essentially says in this letter that in the same way that the cross itself, Jesus' crucifixion, was the most humiliating thing in life. This idea that Jesus was considered a rebel and he was executed by the state naked on this cross. And yet somehow there is where God's greatest power was made manifest, this redemption of the universe. Through this humiliating experience, Paul says, and he argues in the same way, God is made most powerful. God's power is most evident, not in strength, not in high status and flashy things, but in weakness. This beautiful paradigm shift that God is made most powerful, God's power is most evident in weakness, is one that I think confronts me and all of us in our culture, this culture that values greatness. It values power and status and wealth and abundance. And we say, oh, surely this is where God is over here. And we're very, I think, attracted to flashiness, as opposed to humbleness. And we tend to want to shy away from where people are on the margins, or even within ourselves, the parts of us that are weak or not put together. We look at that and we wish that can change. And so I want to invite us today, as we think about the perspective of our faith. I know what culture says, but from our faith perspective, we are actually called to be drawn more to weakness and to see power in weakness, as opposed to have our attention diverted and feeling like we're putting the powerful on pedestals. And so I invite you to think today about those parts that you maybe despise about yourself, that you wish were different. It doesn't mean we shouldn't work to change things that we want to change, but let us not do it because we think that those are the areas where we have been abandoned. Because guaranteed, and this is a message you'll hear from me and Sarah often, is that in those spaces where we are most weak, that's when God is most strong. And we're called to be attracted and move in our work as a church toward the marginalized and those who are weak and those who have been sidelined, those who culture looks at and say they don't have much to offer. We as a church say that's actually not true. This is our population right here. This is where we're called to focus and to see ourselves as a part of, as opposed to see ourselves as a part of the dominant culture. So wherever and however you wrestle with this idea, I hope you give it some thought. It's definitely one that I've been thinking about lately, and I offer it to you today. And in whatever way you'd like to interact with me on this message, I welcome it. God bless you, St. John's. We'll see you on Sunday.